Welcome everybody, Dr. Jonah Schenker. We are here live for Leading for Deeper Learning, Season 2. I want to thank everybody who I had the privilege of speaking with last year as we began to think about why Leading for Deeper Learning, why this podcast. And really it's simple. We cannot do this work in isolation. It is about sharing, it's about elevating voices, and it's about moving the work forward. And so as we think about this year and the focus of Leading for Deeper Learning, we're going to try to use a mirror and create a reflection against the changes that sit in front of us, the changes that we are currently engaged in regarding New York Inspires. And for those of you outside the New York area, New York Inspires a multi-year transformation to think about what it means to be a graduate. And in 2019, the Blue Ribbon Commission was put together to think about that question. And they convened a diverse set of stakeholders to think about what does it mean to be a graduate in New York. And they went to work talking to students, talking to community. And out of that culled out 12 recommendations. Those 12 recommendations went to the Board of Regents. And as the Board of Regents grappled with those 12, they turned to the New York State Education Department and the commissioner and her team and said, what could this look like? What should this look like? And out of the New York State Education Department came what we know as New York Inspires. New York Inspires 4 transformations. 1, the adoption of a portrait of a graduate that has been adopted, a couple of iterations on that, and the latest portrait of a graduate blends the lines of these transversal skills that we know are so critical to prepare students for whatever next is, and we'll come back to that. Transformation 2, reimagining credits and learning experiences as we think about the instructional practices, how we have defined the structure and the system of school based on an industrial model of education and where we might need to go. The decoupling of Regents exams, assessments from graduation requirements. That means they will no longer be required for graduation. That does not mean they're going to go away. They may become part of a portfolio of many ways that we're thinking about how we assess students as they move through this journey of school and ultimately upon their culmination and moving on to whatever is next. And lastly, the 4th transformation, thinking about one diploma, that high bar, the expectation that we know all students need. So one diploma with a multitude of seals and endorsements that honor multiple pathways for students to navigate this path and this journey from pre-K all the way through their senior year. So really exciting changes at Ulster BOCES. Let me talk a little bit about our approach and what we have going on now as we think about our work in collaborating, supporting, and lifting up work as the 700 plus school districts and the Big Five think about what this looks like in New York State. As New York State put out New York Inspires and timelines associated with that as they move through 2029, one thing became really crystal clear for us. And that was, here's all of the things that we need to accomplish for schools. The question was, what is it going to take to lead that work? What should it look like to lead that work? And as we began to think about that, we leaned on an approach that we have been utilizing and leveraging for over a decade. Many of these changes that New York Inspires is calling from have been the very things that us at Ulster BOCES have been working towards, that I align deeply with in my values, and many school districts across New York State were pushing and moving and thinking about what that could look like. It is amazing that we now have a New York State Education Department that is endorsing and saying this is the direction. And so how do we get there? How do we move from current state to future state? There are explicit leadership moves. There are things that need to happen at the building and classroom level. And there is a number of things that are ahead of us to be released from the state that touch all of these transformations. And much of the field, when I have the opportunity to kind of engage in these conversations, the things that I'm hearing are, when are we going to get more information? When are they going to show us or tell us what this might look like? And while this perspective might not be shared by all, I am actually really excited that we don't have any of those details yet. And I'll tell you why I feel that. It is my feeling that if we had all of the things that we had to do, that we would rush as school people and begin to think, how can we make these happen? How can we make these shifts happen within our current context? That the way that we do business now, the way that we operate schools, and I am a believer that there are foundational elements that need to be disrupted, shifted, and changed if we we really want this transformation work to continue. There are two words that we gravitate towards when we talk about New York Inspires. We talk about inspiration and we talk about transformation. Two words which are explicitly used in the rollout of that. And if we are to really inspire folks to want to be part of this change, and if we are wanting these transformations to do what they have the power to do, then we have to pause and do a little bit of work up front before we begin applying all of the things that are going to be happening between now and 2029. And that brings me to the context, the heart and soul, the philosophy that our playbook is based on. It's based on human-centric design. And without going too deep into the why human-centric design or the what of human-centric design, at minimum, what it suggests is before we design things that will impact or that other folks will have to do, we might want to pause for a couple of seconds and ask some questions. And it also subscribes that in our current context, right, I often talk about we have this epidemic of average in our country. And that is our current system of many things in this country are designed around this concept of average, meaning from a cost-effective model, from an efficiency model, we design to do the most amount of good for the most amount of people in the middle to be impacted or to be able to access. And that's okay. But what happens when we design for the average is that we then lose touch with the margins. Those furthest from opportunity or those that we call extreme users, we have to figure out how they can access whatever that product is in the middle. And human-centric design and design thinking suggests that what we ought to be doing is designing for those furthest from opportunity and furthest from that middle point, designing for those extreme users. And when we do that design work, when we design for those furthest from opportunity or for those extreme users, it turns out that it's not a zero-sum game. Like nobody loses out. Everybody benefits. And there's a couple of metaphors that I always share, which I'll share with you, which is this idea of the curb cut in the sidewalk, right? The curb cut designed for accessibility devices, someone in a wheelchair to be able to transcend the 6 or 8 inches between a sidewalk and a street corner. And that design, it turns out that for a parent, a mother, a father, a guardian with a stroller, with a child to transcend that same distance, well, that was good for them too. The delivery person with a dolly needing to load something up, well, was good for them too. Or the individual walking their bike to transcend that, well, that was helpful for them too. So like we design for somebody furthest from opportunity and all of these value adds and benefits in the middle. The other example that I like to share, and at some point, this example might be outdated. We have to switch up the athlete, but Michael Jordan, right? Extreme user. The heights in which Michael Jordan comes down from the air and hits the gym floor are of heights that average people don't jump. And so what happens, the impact on his body was tremendous. And so what was created at Nike, the engineers went to work and a pocket of air that sits in a sneaker to alleviate that pressure was designed, the Nike Air. And it just turned out that everybody else in the world liked comfortable shoes too. So like that's that idea of when we are thinking about those furthest from opportunity, that work happens there. And so with that in mind, as we set out as school folks, as we set out as leaders, as we set out to engage community to think about really if our intention is to transform this schools, then let's take this moment right now that we have, before we have the items from state, before all the collateral, the reformatted standards, the rubrics, how credits might be offered. Let's take some time and engage in what design thinking and human-centric design calls us to do, which is engage in empathy work. Let's talk to students. Let's talk to community members. Let's talk to industry and college and arts partners and talk about what should schools really look like. And let's make sure that we begin to do some visioning about what we hope for. And let us not put constraints on that dream. Let us think about without any constraints. This is really what school should look like because we owe that to our students. And then as this collateral begins to drop, as we get information about what this needs to look like, let's begin to incorporate those into a roadmap of where we were talking about schools needing to go as codified through that empathy work. Let's not go back and try to layer on innovation onto the sacred cows of education that just aren't about that, right? Like at the end of the day, there are things that we do, structuring classes across a week, 5 days by 8 period with siloed academics, where when we look at a master schedule, which is a statement of values, we don't see these things that New York Inspires calls for. We don't see the things that even before New York Inspires was calling for that we've been talking about and know that are good. Things about restorative practice and belonging and access, right? Like those things need to show up in the blueprint of school, the value system of school. The value system of school is time, master schedules and calendars and budget. And so you can't say you're going to do all of this work or you believe in these things if it's not reflected in your value statements. And so let's retool that and reimagine, and more importantly, present a cohesive roadmap about how we are going to get there. Nobody expects these things to happen overnight, but we ought to be. Shame on us if each year we're not taking a look back and engaging in deep reflection, not a day or an hour or a professional development to think back, but like dedicated time to say, did the things that we did this year, did they help students? Did we as leaders make it easy for teachers to do their job? And if not, and if we let inertia carry us forward, then what a disservice to our students and our communities. We ought to be spending that time and money to look back to say, this was really cool. Let's bring it forward. But how do we need to change? I think part of that work, as we think about where we're at in phase one, is why I have really thought about the focus of this year's arc of how I'm going to engage with you through leading for deeper learning. I want to be able to share perspective of how we're leading this work both locally and these conversations statewide around this phase one, this empathy work, what we're hearing from the field. I want to elevate voices from what you're hearing in the field. As folks begin to re-envision and reimagine, I want to share those ideas with you. And so we'll be moving this year in a different sequence where I'll share personally some of these reflections that I'm hearing. It will be how I'm processing it as a leader. It'll be thoughts that I have. I'll look to bring in the research that we are moving along the way. And then I'll have an opportunity to sit down with leaders as we move through the year and say, what does this look like in your local context? What are you learning? Let's share that with the field, because innovation and growth that happens in isolation is a disservice to the field. We have a commitment to share out good work, hard questions, struggle as we all move through this, right? This isn't clean. It's not easy work, but it is critical work as we think about moving from a system which I think there is consistency and shared perspective that it's outdated, that there are things that just need to change. And now we have permission and a pathway to do it. So I'm looking forward to being part of the voice, being part of the conversation with you all as we think about moving forward. So I want to switch right now and share a little bit about our journey at Ulster BOCES, which is this work. It wasn't under the umbrella of New York Inspires, but we've been having this conversation around school transformation, around these changes that we've been implementing in our local context and in our work with our 8 districts. And as I thought about kind of on the ride over here, where did it start? And it started with us getting really clear about who we were going to be. More importantly, it started with us getting really clear about why we were going to be. And we have worked hard, relentless at our why and our mission and making sure people can interact with that. At Ulster BOCES, we call it our North Star, but we have a mission and a vision as a BOCES around shared services, and those are beautiful things. That's who we are. That's the work we do. But over the last 7 years, we've been kind of picking at and pushing at, why do we do this work? And for us at Ulster BOCES, it's about 4 things. It's about our North Star, which say that all learners, that's adults and students, will develop their unique self. They will contribute to community. They will develop capacity, and that will happen through ongoing cycles of inquiry. That's why we do this work, to create a learning environment, whether you're a leader, whether you are on the back end and not student facing, right? Like that why is critical for everybody to connect to the work. And as we think about how we do this work, it's about creating deeper leading and learning experiences. And what we do each day is we double down and we work towards improving really 3 components. Our crew practices, that is our intentional work towards building culture and community. That work doesn't stop. We don't have a 3-year strategic plan to that. That is a commitment to relationships, which is forever work. And unless you're tending to that relationship and community work each and every day, engaging in how to have courageous and difficult conversations, thinking about building culture. What do you do when culture is impacted, right? Like all critical pieces. And the most important piece to the crew crew work is I remember in our work, I had a colleague who said community work is really, really critical. Culture work is really, really critical because if you want to do restorative work and you don't have community, there's just nothing to restore back to. And so that's why we resource towards that. You'll see that embedded time for advisory and whole child meetings and in our adult professional learning where this work is intentional, our crew practices. The other side is the equity-based dispositions of process-based learning. We believe there are 4 shifts that are critical as we think about the instructional shifts and the adult mindsets to innovative work. And again, that's a whole separate conversation and podcast around diving into those structures. But at minimum, I'll share with you today, there are 4 things that must be true. We must launch ideas. That is common experiences for people to come together to engage in whatever the question is, whatever the project is, whatever the assignment is. And each one of these drivers has an equity driver behind it. Then we move into design and iteration, where it's not about passive learning and compliance, but it's about iterative cycles, creation, tuning, reflecting, feedback, right? Like learning as an active behavior that doesn't end when you submit something, but continuous improvement. And that's really goes into that third one around tuning and reflection. And those design, iteration, and tuning and reflections, those are ongoing cycles that happen throughout, but ultimately culminating with celebrations of learning, right? Like lifting up the process, not just the product of what is happening. And that's critical as we think about, again, students and adults, right? Like these are basic needs that humans need to be able to connect with to find purpose in whatever they're working on. Those are the critical elements when you have an employee, when you have a student, when you're asking somebody to do something, like, can they see themselves in the work? Have they had the experience and the knowledge to be able to access it? Can they find purpose? And then can we lift up and celebrate like what we learned, what was accomplished, and at the same time, like give feedback that's hard on content and soft on people, right? Like that's the focus. And when we go back and we trace the equity drivers behind this, launch. I often talk when I have the opportunity to speak to folks about why launch. Well, if I'm speaking to 25 people, there's an assumption that each one of those people are going to go at whatever I'm asking, writing an assignment, preparing for this test, building a rocket ship or a spaceship that's going to the moon, whatever it is, that they're bringing in the same lived experience, and they're not. We know that our learners bring in a unique story, and one person's story has them where they're able to travel the world. They're in a literacy-rich environment. They have a table where hot meals are served. They have access to resources. And on the other hand, there are learners who are watching children because mom is working 4 jobs, dad's incarcerated, and there's no doors on any of the rooms to create privacy or a place where they can get things done, right? Like that's a broad spectrum and everything in between. And so as soon as I ask a question as a teacher or a lead learner to that class, it's not even, right? They're bringing in that schema, they're bringing in that story. And so a launch creates a common experience for all of those learners. So at minimum, those 25 learners can bring whatever the experiences I created to apply to whatever I'm asking them to do. And then we don't dismiss the unique stories. Design and iteration allows every individual in that room to bring in their lived experiences. Like we can't control for those outside conditions. We ought to be concerned with those as humans, but we can create and use the protocols and structures so that everybody is bringing in those outside experiences and not harboring them for a single assignment or single exam, but sharing them with the class to elevate all work. And tuning and reflection then moves into the process where, again, that learner's expertise, feedback from others is used to elevate everybody's work. And ultimately, at the end of the goal, we're not celebrating the 100 on the exam as the only celebration. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't celebrate that, but we are celebrating the learning process. We're lifting up the journey that any one of those learners and all of those learners have gone through as they've moved through, again, whatever I'm asking them to do. And so again, as we move into this first episode, I wanted to share a little bit about this like larger context, the landscape in front of us, New York Inspires, what I think is mission critical to get off the ground beginning before we do any of this other work, and a little bit about how we've done this work in our local context at Ulster BOCES. This work stems from deep partnerships around the country, thinking about those who have been engaged in this work. And it isn't about becoming another institution, but it is about co-design and co-authoring product and process, and ultimately ultimately about coalition, right? Like we need to identify the pockets around this country. We then need to identify the pockets around this state and begin to connect those fractals around coalition to help form group thinking, relationship-based networks that are thinking about how we do this work together. It is no longer acceptable to just think about our local context. If we are truly to ask what is being asked of us in New York Inspires, the portrait of a grad, skills that we know are most critical for students as they move out of our institutions into whatever's next, with the CRSE framework in the center of the portrait of a grad. The CRSE framework calls us to center diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. If we are to truly do that work, then we must be connected in a large network that transcends our local environment. It doesn't mean that we cannot and should not think about the unique ways that we need to do this in our communities, but we have a responsibility as leaders and as educators to the students in New York to make sure that we are in dialogue and conversation as we move this work forward. Part of this foundational work as we begin this empathy work is to talk to school people, to talk to students, to talk to board members, to talk to industry and community-based partners to ask this question of, what do you really want to see when our students exit your schools? And to begin to think about opening up the pathways for students to be able to show success, follow passion, and for us to figure out the school things we need to do. How are we going to assess those students? What is this going to look like in student management portals? Like those questions, those adult things that we need to figure out cannot get in the way of this opportunity to redesign and rethink schools while bringing amazing things forward that we're already doing. Those adult dilemmas cannot be the excuse to not do this work right. I'm super excited to be part of this conversation, to be part of leaders in New York as we're thinking about this work. My only ask to you all as we think about moving forward is how can we continue to reach out, to connect, to share bright spots, to share issues or dilemmas that were coming in and to think through those together. Anything absent going at this work in our full capacity with everything we have is a disservice. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity here to do what I think this work is. I know this work is. This is multi-generational legacy work, the work that we're engaged in right now, the work that we'll be entering next year and over the next 2 years has the opportunity to shift the trajectory for students for generations to come. So thank you for joining us on Leading for Deeper Learning. It's always awesome to spend time with you all.